Greetings Lumen students, it's week 11 and this is your Monday video. I am excited to be here today, except for the fact that there's a sword hanging over my head. Does anybody know why there would be a sword dangling above me? Well, it has to do with both our history studies and our language arts studies today. I'm hopeful that this sword will not fall on me, and I need to tell you a little bit more about the fall of the Roman Empire. We talked about some of the amazing Roman empires, both good and bad throughout history. Well, the Roman Empire doesn't exist anymore, right? So what happened to it? Well, eventually it got too big to manage completely, and so they divided it into the Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire. Well, the center of the Eastern Roman Empire was in Constantinople. The center of the Western Roman Empire was in Rome, and the Western Roman Empire got poorer and poorer and weaker, and the Eastern Roman Empire didn't didn't volunteer to jump in and save them. Barbarians started invading and taking over most of the Western Roman Empire. So Rome by now had been destroyed and the Western Roman Empire was in hiding. One of the barbarians, whose name was Orestes, decided that he was going to drive the Roman emperor out of hiding. And when he went to find the Roman emperor, he was long gone. And so Orestes decided that he would make his own son emperor. There was just one problem. His son was 6 years old. Didn't stop Orestes. He ordered all his men to obey the 6-year-old emperor. He gave his son a new name, Romulus Augustus, and you can probably tell where those names come from. Romulus, of course, the founder of Rome, and Augustus after Caesar Augustus. That was a pretty impressive name, right, for such a little boy, but the people who were left in the Western Roman Empire just laughed when they heard it. Romulus Augusta, what a silly name for a child. We're not going to call him Romulus, we'll call him Momulus. Momulus meant little disgrace. The Romans felt insulted because they were expected to obey the child of a barbarian. But Momulus didn't get to be emperor for very long. Another barbarian captured Momulus and his father Orestes. Momulus, now 7 years old, was sent off to live in another city. And that was the end of the Western Roman Empire. It was full of barbarian kings, each one ruling his own little kingdom, and the lands that used to belong to Rome now belonged to them. Okay? So the sword hanging above me is called the Sword of Damocles. And this story comes from the famous Roman by the name of Cicero, and he told this story. There was a king whose name was Dionysius, and Dionysius had a servant whose name was Damocles. Damocles one day was saying to the king, "Oh, you're so lucky. You have all the food you want, all the rich clothes you want. You get to buy whatever you want. You get to do whatever you want. It must be so amazing to be king." And Dionysius says, "So, you think I'm so lucky, do you? Let's trade places." And so Damocles got to sit on the throne for a day. He thought it was wonderful until he noticed a sword, very, very sharp sword, hanging over his head, hanging, in fact, by a single horsehair. And the king said to him, "So, Damocles, how do you feel about being king now?" That's what it feels like to be king, to have a sword hanging by a thread over your head at all times. Damocles decided no, he didn't like the thought of being a king anymore, and so he left the throne, and Dionysius became king again. think about that. Always having a sword hanging over your head. That's kind of a true principle, isn't it? And each of the Roman emperors that we learned about had their lives threatened. Julius Caesar, of course, was killed. Nero was very unpopular. Other emperors had difficulties as well. So, yes, being king or emperor may sound awesome, but comes with a heavy price and responsibility. The other reason for this sword, so that expression is still in our language today, okay? The sword of Damocles can be used to describe someone who's in a really precarious situation. Maybe a politician who, is just their opinion is so, their popularity is just hanging by a thread. People are frustrated with them and can just like boot them out in a minute's notice, kind of things like that. Well, there's another reason that this sword is hanging over my head today, and that is because we are going to be talking about dangling modifiers this week, as well as misplaced modifiers. So what is a dangling or a misplaced modifier? Doesn't sound too good, right? Well, let's take a look. Let's see if I can... The sword... And I have some misplaced modifiers that I placed on my blade that we're going to talk about, okay? And you're going to see what this means. So this is an example. Number 1, he barely kicked that ball 20 yards. What does it mean to barely kick? Did he really barely kick? What does the barely modify? The corrected sentence should say, he kicked that ball barely 20 yards. 20 yards is not far. And so the barely refers to the 20 yards. And the barely was in the wrong place. He barely kicked that ball 20 yards. So that's wrong. Okay, next one. She serves sandwiches to the children on paper plates. So, were the children on paper plates? The children were sitting on paper plates? She serves sandwiches to the children on paper plates. Why would the children be on the paper plates? That doesn't make any sense, students. No, it should, if we correct that misplaced modifier, it should say, she served the children sandwiches on paper plates. The sandwiches were on the paper plates, not the kids. Okay, it was in the wrong place. Sword should not be above your head, and children should not be sitting on paper plates. Sandwiches belong there. Okay, it was in the wrong place. Misplaced modifiers. Make sure that the item modifying it is put closest to the thing it is modifying. He nearly drove the car for 6 hours. Sorry, example. How do you nearly drive? That's really scary. If you're nearly driving, I don't want to be on the road with you. If you guys were to start trying to drive, you might nearly drive. And that would not be good. You would cause lots of accidents, like a sword falling on someone's head. What does the nearly actually mean? Where should it be modifying? He drove the car for nearly 6 hours a day. Well, that makes sense. Almost 6 hours, right? Nearly 6 hours. Not that he nearly drove or almost drove, but that he drove the car for nearly 6 hours. Almost 6 hours. And one final misplaced modifier that we'll use as an example, if I can get it off without getting cut. Go away, sword, you're in the wrong place. You're dangling right here by me, and I don't like it. Dangling modifiers are not good. Misplaced modifiers. She saw a puppy and a kitten on the way to the store. What? The puppy and the kitten were on the way to the store? The puppy and the kitten weren't on the way to the store, were they? No, she was on the way to the store. So we've got to put on the way to the store close to she. That's what it's modifying. It shouldn't be dangling over here. Okay, it doesn't belong next to me. Okay, on the way to the store, she saw a puppy and a kitten. Not the puppy and the kitten were on the way to the store. Puppies and kittens don't go to the store. Right, students? So it's important that you put the noun, okay, next to the thing that's modifying it next to the noun. Okay, they've got to go close together. Okay, next to the thing that it is modifying. Put it right there. Don't put it off dangling somewhere where it doesn't belong, like over someone's head or right here beside them while they're trying to teach. Hey, not a good idea. And we're going to talk a little bit more about dangling modifiers as we continue on with our lesson today. Let me tell you what your spelling words are for this week. Pull my chart over and take this sword down. Sorry, Sword of Damocles. Not too much of a fan of samurai swords hanging over me. All right, let's see what homonyms we can find today that we're going to be studying this week. So the first three include raise, to lift up, to increase or to improve. The next one we have our rays, meaning rays of the sun, right? Makes sense. And then finally, maybe this one isn't a word you've seen before. To raise is to cut down to the ground, to demolish, or to annihilate. Okay? The barbarians razed the land. Okay? So, raise, raise, and raise. Let's see what else I've got here. We have see, as in a body of water, and to see, meaning to use your senses, to visually take in the world. We have tea and tea. This type of tea you drink, right? In a cup, like a teacup. And this type of tea is related to golf. It's a small wooden peg that holds a golf ball for players to use. There are three types of pears. We have a pair of shoes, meaning two. Okay. We have a pear that you would eat, partridge in a pear tree, a fruit. And we have to pare, which is to peel things into thin strips, P-A-R-E. Okay, you've got a paring knife, and you can pare an apple with cutting it into thin strips. Okay, we have maze, which is, of course, a very puzzle that an individual walks through. And we also have maize, which is a word for corn, M-A-I-Z-E. Okay, here's two others. Yule, a contraction for you will, and Jewel, meaning related to Christmas. How about weight, okay, which is how much something weighs, the heaviness, okay, the mass or the burden, and wait, meaning to pause. You'd have to wait to sit and wait for something to happen. Okay, we have bear, which is an animal, and bare, meaning without appropriate covering. We have affect and defect. Affect is to influence, to shape, or to change, and the effect is the result or the outcome. So affect means to cause something, okay, to change, and the effect is the result of something. Laze is to place something in a resting position, and laze is to relax, to do no work. laze. I want to laze around today. Okay, we're going to be playing some more games with these homonyms this week. Pay attention to them, learn their meaning, know how to spell each of them so that you're prepared for your spelling quiz if you're doing that, little students. All right. We're going to get back into the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The story that we had gotten to is the story of Calvin Smiley. And he was playing a saw when they walked into a church. A saw, like a saw, a real saw, like a saw that you would use to cut wood. And he said that this saw is a wonder of the world. Okay? Calvin Smiley's story. We always called it the grasshopper summer. I was all of 10 years old, and it was one of the finest growing seasons Bent Fork had ever seen. The corn was tall and golden, and for once, even poor folks like us felt like they might have cash in their pockets come fall. So, this is Calvin Smiley telling his story. Okay? This isn't Eben talking anymore. One morning, my cousin Elroy came riding up like he'd seen his own ghost. He lived 10 miles away, and he'd worn his poor horse down. He was shouting so, it took us a spell to untangle what he was saying. We finally realized that a plague of locusts had eaten all his crops in 2 days flat, and they were headed toward our farm. Like it says in the good book, they covered the face of the whole earth, so that the land was darkened, and they did eat every herb of the land and all the fruit of the trees. Those grasshoppers, that's what they were, in fact, had eaten everything green on Elroy's farm, including his wife's green dress that was hanging on the clothesline. We went right to work. Papa built fires all around the edges of our field, hoping the clouds of smoke would scare the grasshoppers away. Mama was afraid he'd burn up the good crops, but Pop said he'd burn them before he'd let the grasshoppers eat them. It wasn't long till we heard him coming. To my dying day, which I hope is still some ways off, I will hear the buzzing of those millions of tiny wings. It made my skin crawl, still does, just to think of it. The sky quickly took on that greenish color like it gets before a cyclone hits. A fast-moving cloud was sailing right towards us. Lord have mercy, this cloud was alive. A cloud of grasshoppers a mile across. And the fires my Pop set only seemed to attract them to us. Pop and Mama and my brothers and sisters and me all grabbed brooms and shovels and took to the fields and started swinging, vowing to beat 'em off if we had to. Well, I swung and I swung till my arm nearly fell off. And after an hour, those critters were still hungry. They could strip a cornstalk bare quick as you can snap your fingers. Pa tended the fires and Mama and us swung our brooms, but it was a losing battle. The noise of their buzzing got so loud I could barely hear Mom and Pop yelling at us. I mostly saw their lips moving. Even after I covered my ears, I could still hear them. I thought I would lose my mind. I had to stop that sound. Like a crazy person, I dropped my broom and I ran for the barn. I could hear Pop yelling at me to come back there, and the others yelled too. I didn't care. I grabbed my bow and I started playing my old saw. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. It didn't bother me that Pop was furious. I'd have done anything to get that sound out of my ears. After a while, he was still yelling, but I couldn't believe what he was saying. Bring that saw out here, boy! Come on now! Keep on playing! I raced outside, sat on the rain barrel, and kept on playing. I closed my ears to those grasshoppers, and I closed my eyes too, and I played and played and played. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear, the hour I first believed. I felt my brother Ben shaking my shoulder. I opened my eyes and my ears because Ben was jumping up and down. Look, Cal! Look! The grasshoppers are leaving! he shouted, and I could actually hear him again. Sure enough, the waves of grasshoppers were retreating. Hallelujah! Although I'd never seen an ocean, I thought it looked like the tide going out. And I heard my mom and Pop shouting, "Keep playing, Cal! Keep playing!" So I played that old saw for all it was worth. And Mama and Pop and Ben and my sisters, Dolly and Dora, they all sang along. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace hath brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. They sang and I played until long after the cloud disappeared. Most of our crops were saved that summer, and I didn't mind that the grasshoppers hated my music. All that mattered was that they left. I was merely a humble instrument of the Lord that day, and the saw was my humble instrument. If you want to call anything a wonder, glory be, this saw is a wonder for certain. I will sing unto the Lord, because he hath dealt bountifully with me. Amen. Calvin Smiley stared at his saw for a minute. Amen, he repeated softly, sitting there with his head bowed. Mr. Smiley, do you still play that saw sitting out in your fields? I was thinking of his rows of thriving crops. Because maybe the way things grow there. I started to tell him my idea, but Calvin didn't let me finish. You're a smart boy, even, he said. Yes, sir, a real smart boy. He picked up his saw and went back to playing, and the conversation was over. I listened for a while, then quietly tiptoed back outside with Sal at my heels. I leaned up against the oak, took out my tablet, and began to write about one more wonder of Sassafras Springs, as Calvin and his saw burst out into the liveliest version of Turkey in the Straw ever heard in the graveyard of the community church. Awesome. So we have got a doll, corncob doll, an old bookshelf, and a saw. An old musical saw. 3 of the 7 wonders have been found. Students, I think you'd be amazed what you would see if you looked around you. Notice wonders in the world around you. Do you think that there are Do you think that there's amazing things, amazing stories? There just might be. All right, thank you. Good luck with your action items, and we'll catch you next tomorrow.